Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Share in the Chair, Sunshine Cathedral's Wednesday talk show where we interview religious leaders, a different leader every week. And this week, our guest is from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And if you have internet connection or have walked by a newsstand or have radio in the car or watch cable news at all, you've heard a lot about Minneapolis lately. And we got somebody right there on ground level, the Reverend Dr. Dewayne Davis. He is the senior pastor of All God's Children in Minneapolis. Yes. In fact, when there was some a fire that was going initially with all of the chaos in the streets and whatnot, there was a fire very close to their church. We spent a night, fingers crossed, and in communication back and forth because it was dangerously close. So that's how close to the action Reverend Dewayne is. So anyway, welcome Dewayne Davis. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. You know, I love running my mouth with you.
Dewayne has a show. We'll talk about that later. He has a spiritual thing that he does midweek from All God's Children. Sometimes he has guests. I got to be a guest on that one time. And his husband said, y'all know y'all were supposed to be doing a show and not just having a kiki, right? And I don't know. I think a kiki is good for everybody.
Right.
So, well, okay, we got about half an hour. And so let's fill that with stuff. So let's just start right off. No softballs these days because we don't have time. We just don't have time for Reverend Elder Pat Baumgartner was with us last week. We just jumped in because that's the world. Yes. Mona West. We've talked to Pastor Terry, Steve Pierce in Orlando. I mean, we talked with people from some hot spots, so we just don't want to waste too much time with that. So let me say some names to you. Mm-hmm. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and from your own city, George Floyd. I'm just cutting it off at those four names because sadly, I could mention 30 more. Yes. If we were just to go back just 4, 5, 6 years, we could really just fill the hours naming names. But Arbery, Taylor, McDade, and Floyd, you know why I mentioned them. And what do you have to say about these who have been senselessly killed and the passionate outcries in recent weeks? Maybe even some of the changes that seem to be resulting because people will not be silent anymore and are finding ways of being heard. But I say these names and that brings what from you?
Yeah, you did. You went right into it. I'm still wrestling with grief. And one of the things that's been really hard for me in this entire period is because I had assumed that I had gotten sort of a spine of steel around these killings. I assumed that in my analytic mind, my systems thinking, that I know that we're going to have tragedies and I know that it's going to happen. So when I saw George Floyd pinned down on the street and eventually inevitably died, and all of the others, I have really been wrestling with a grief. And one thing that kept coming back to me that still is resonating with me now has been something that the scholar Eddie Glaude talked about in his recent book. He talked about the value gap in the United States, and he has a sad formulation. And he said that the value gap is the gap between how the lives of white people, the gap between the value that is placed on the lives of white people and the value that is placed on the lives of Black people. And there is a gap because white lives are valued more. And that framing is so jarring and it's anathema to everything I felt. But ever since I ever since George Floyd, especially, it's been hard not to feel under siege and to have someone, as if someone is shouting to you, your lives don't matter and you are not valued. And that is hard to feel, that kind of rejection. Finally, there's this, it's a meme that's been going around about, something like, people really wished America liked black people. It's something like how they don't seem to really love us. And so those deaths are something that sort of just weigh on me. And it's like someone, you want to believe something else, but they keep telling you something. You want to believe that we all matter and that your life is of value, but something about these deaths that keep shouting to you, no, that's not true. And that's heartbreaking. And I'm really hurt. And by the way, many of the clergy, Black clergy here are, many of us have been texting each other, and that grief is so palpable. And even one day you feel okay, the next day that grief comes back in waves. So when you say those names, it's just this miasma of grief, this loss of life. And now I'm in this place where, when I have some optimism, there's this really gnawing sense that, what if nothing changes? And so that's what all of that is so crazy and unformed. But that's what I'm wrestling with, a deep grief that I think I don't quite have a handle on yet.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you saw that horrible cartoon that in response to people calling police departments to account, and which is what this whole defund police thing is. Of course, nobody wants a policeless society. Nobody wants anarchy. What they're saying is, let's reallocate funds to do more good or whatever. And so in response to that, from Missouri, I think it was called, in fact, I believe the publication was called The Missourian. There was this ad, and it showed a hooded African-American youth snatching the purse of a white blonde lady. And of course, she's screaming, "Help, call 911." And the mugger is laughing, "Ha ha ha, there's no police," so whatever. But just the clear racial imagery of, who's the victim and who's the aggressor, and it was jarring. I'm like, wait a minute, not in 2021, not in June of 2021. Right. Like, okay, January 2021, okay, more of the same, get over yourself. This is June of 2021, and some fool drew that cartoon, and then some other fool printed it.
Right, yeah.
Now, so, I am 53 years old. I've been woke for a minute and a half, and still drowsy in one eye. I mean, I'm just barely trying to even stay woke. And so, meanwhile, you're the son of a bishop from the South. You come from a long tradition of preaching and activism, not just in your life, but in your family, in your community, in your religious tradition. You have 4 degrees, 3 of them from the DC area. So, like, if I just feel exhausted and outraged, you must just laugh at me for even like daring to have a feeling at all, right?
Well,
just help us if you can. Preach just a little bit about, how we can just process all of this a little bit more sanely, other than just, I'm still angry that every time people say we're hurting, people don't see us, people don't hear us, please stop killing us, and that somehow threatens people, and they feel fragile, and their response is, but we matter too. Shut up, nobody's talking about you right now. But then I'm like, okay, Pastor, that's not good either.
Right. You have to be pastoral, and you have to hear the frustration of others who aren't able to see. Yes, you have to do that. But here is one bit of optimism. One thing that there has been one difference in this situation than previous situations. When Jamar Clark died back in 2015, that was not, there was about 3 blocks from where we live, and I was participating in the occupation of the 4th precinct, and of course I'm using the preaching moment to really draw attention to the issue of this is a justice issue. After Jamar Clark died, there were a few people at the church who really took issue and stopped attending. After Philando Castile died, similar thing happened. People just took issue with me talking about this as a justice issue, saying that I was being political. But the difference I've seen in this regard, and yes, there are some people who've taken issue with things that I've said, and maybe it's because we're in a COVID world and we're not gathering, that I'm not getting the full weight of that. But what has been different, and it goes to what you were just speaking to, what has been different is that there have been a whole lot more people in our congregation, white people, who have come forward on social media and in their own work, and are really taking on the fight. In essence, really stepping up and saying, these are issues that we are going to have to confront. They are uncomfortable. They are, it certainly is not going to be something we're going to get right away. And we're not going to be able to go back to business as usual. And more voices than I even ever thought have come forward and are really making that case. And so that's been one really bright spot that I have, while I have had to preach and I've had to talk and had to do things, I've been really comforted in this sense that there are more and more people who appear to be taking up the fight, and they're doing it. They're challenging friends and family, and it's uncomfortable for them, and yet they have been consistent and they've been doing it. And that really has given me some optimism about where we are, even as I sort of wrestle with that grief.
When I first break through a blind spot, or in fact, I just heard myself say blind spot and I felt uncomfortable about that. When you know what I mean? When when I first become aware of something, when I do sort of first wake up to something and I want to be on the right side of things, I want to stand up for my people, my gay people, or my religious people, or my Floridians, or whatever my group is that maybe I feel is being left out or assaulted or abused. Maybe my age group, that I'm more and more concerned about age, the more of it I have, and so there's that. But then I also, of course, want to be an ally to people that I'm not necessarily in their cohort. And I look back at my beginnings, baby steps, my first time to raise my voice as an ally in several situations. And I look back and I cringe. I'm like, oh God, did I say it that way? Right. This is what I meant. This is what I was trying to do. Right. I didn't even understand. Oh, I'm thinking particularly about, I've just become a passionate trans advocate. And I think I've gotten pretty good at it. Obviously I have a zillion pounds and yards and miles of things to learn yet. Right. But oh my God, how I botched some so well-meaning, only from love, but just got it wrong, just said it dumb. What can you say to people, maybe straight people who want to be an LGBTQ ally, or people who want to be allies in these race discussions, or people who want to be allies when it comes to economic justice? I mean, when we first start, we're gonna mess it up.
We're gonna mess it
up. How can you encourage us to not only get better, but not to be so afraid of getting it wrong that we don't do anything?
Right. That's a very good question. And I love what you said, because Darrell, I remember it with me too. Anytime I'm trying to figure it out, I get it wrong. But one thing I always tell people too is don't pursue justice as a transactional enterprise. We have been created to be consumers, and in that we've been so conditioned and embedded with that we tend to look at what we're doing, even when we want to be well-meaning, as a transaction. What I mean by that is we think that the pursuit of justice in the case of LGBTQ people or Black people or any justice issue, we assume that there is something material to be gained. In essence, I'm going to graduate, and then everybody's going to say, like, "Here, you did it," and you, and I, yeah, right. And I understand that. I'm like that too. I want the A. I want the I want the degree. But a justice issue, what I mean by that is, and here's why I say that. I've seen people, and I know a lot of people who've said they've seen a justice issue, and they really want to learn and they want to be advocates. And then what they end up doing, they start arguing over means.
Mm.
They start arguing over the exceptions or the qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you start going, that's where you start not being an ally. If you start saying, okay, I agree with you in principle, but let me start arguing with you over means. Let me start arguing. What I'm saying is, go all in, learn, mess up, even wrestle with the questions, but and listen, do all of that work, and realize that the goal here is justice and liberation for all God's children. That is the goal. And that goal, if I were talking to my folks, that goal it extends out beyond glory, but you never stop reaching for it. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing I want people to do, that if the goal is justice and liberation for all God's children, your work is not done. Because as much justice as we pursue, injustice is almost always the status quo. And therefore, your work has to be, so in so many words, we are going to have to not focus so much on how much we fail, as we're going to have to focus on how do I keep advancing the ball for justice, even when I do it poorly and wrongly, and just keep getting up and start. That's the way I tend to look at it. So I in essence, what I'm telling people is, get it wrong, risk something, lose friends, and know that the work is justice, and you are bending it every time you do that, every time you stand up, every time you learn a new thing, every time you, and even if you somehow can't help but argue over means, or you can't argue over, the qualifications, just make sure that at the end of it, that the goal remains the goal, justice for as many people as possible.
Well, you're going to pick up a lot of fans and followers tonight. You might lose a few too. I don't know.
I'm used to that one.
But you're going to pick up a lot. And so people who follow you, people who know about you and watch you, they know or will know that you've got decades into this justice business. That on staff, being on staff level or on committee level or board level, you have been doing policy work and justice work for the Episcopal Church, mm-hmm. for metropolitan community churches, for a U.S. senator. If they're going to see you, if they watch you preach or hear you preach, they're going to. And your sermons are archived, aren't they?
Yes.
Because I know people like me. I would like to pick out a 3 or 4 hour window of time and just watch great sermon after service. So I can go to church and then another and then another. And so if people do that, if they can block out 2-3 hours and just indulge in great sermons, they need to put all God's children on that list.
That's right. Do it.
So they'll hear you address things in sermons, of course. And then maybe if they even watch the news, they'll see you in the street with a bullhorn or on the steps of the state capitol or in the hall of the capitol talking to legislators. I mean, that's been your shtick for a long time. Which is why we want to ask you all of these questions. But you're also the son of a bishop. You're also a church pastor. and yet all of this work in your life seems so seamless. I knew you before seminary, I knew you during seminary, I knew you after seminary, then you went back for more seminary. And all of this seems seamless, as if it's all the same thing. Maybe you can talk about how justice work is the work of the gospel.
Yeah. So I grew up Pentecostal in Mississippi, in Church of God in Christ. And also that the emphasis in Church of God, and all that I knew grew up, it was always holiness, sinfulness, how do you, and otherworldly salvation, and that's what you're focused on. You gotta, and to be separated from the world, sanctified. That I grew up hearing that from my father quite a bit. And one of the reasons I even left that tradition, I left that tradition when I went off to college at age 18, because I was I was coming out as gay, and that just was not compatible with that tradition. But what a lot of people don't know, and I think what it may not be clear when we think about Church of God in Christ or Pentecostalism, in what it is, what it looks like. But I grew up in one of the poorest counties in Mississippi. And my father had two churches in the Delta of Mississippi, and a lot of poverty. And so, Darrell, all I've ever known is my father, who was my pastor. All I've ever known is someone who talked and addressed poverty all the time. It was what he did when no one was looking. Actually, no one ever saw that kind of thing. It was, I laugh and joke about how, someone would just come to the door and say, tell my mother or my father what was going on. And they would go into our own pantry and refrigerator and get groceries. And I would be just angry. Like, why are you giving away my peanut butter? But the funny thing is that you don't ever realize how much that you are inculcated into that kind of thing until, you go off and start living your own life. And so even when I thought the church was not going to even be a part of anything that I did, and I went into politics, that was the first job out of college, was on Capitol Hill. And, the only thing I knew is that here was this entity of government. And I also was fortunate that I worked with members of Congress who really wanted to do good work. But everything I knew was, how do you bring to bear all of this power and this influence on making life better for the most vulnerable people in our country? How do you do that? And by the way, that extended to LGBTQ people in the early 90s when I started, in the mid 90s when I started working on Capitol Hill. We were really in the throes of some big fights about LGBTQ rights. And so every member I worked for, every job that I did, it was this idea, like, how do we make life better for the most vulnerable? So everything I did, even in politics, that was what I was doing. That's who I worked for. That's what I was trying to accomplish. All of the portfolios I had were about health and human services, the Department of Justice. These were the issues that I worked on in every member's office that I worked on. And this is about helping people who were vulnerable. And so there was never any time in my life that I was doing work in a secular context or in a religious context that I didn't have this idea that there were vulnerable people that needed the work of allies and people who can access things to come in and do that work. And so I when I think about even some of the ways that I resisted what my father wanted to do, I never wanted to be a preacher, never wanted to be anything like him. It's something that I can never shake, that I saw and grew up with. And so I don't know how not to do it. I've even said, I want not to do that. I want to not care. I even try corporate life for a few years, thinking like, oh, I just want to, and I could never quite shake that this is the work I need to do.
I kind of teared up here a little bit hearing you tell your story, because I never made this connection before. Your family's concerned for other people, and you're concerned for other people. You said you don't want to be like your dad, and yet you left home and went to college, and by training are also an economist.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah. I had never realized. I mean, I never put that together. That before seminary.
Yes.
You are by, and of course, you did politics and all that, but you are by education an economist also. You've always, your life has been about how can it get better.
How can it get better? Yes, yes. And try, and Darrell, try.
You got me.
Try, but everything I thought I was trying to do, trying to get away from it, I could never. And even now, there are times where I even complain, like, I wish I could just not. But and when I went into ministry, which I went into kicking and screaming, my prayer was, and I didn't want to do it, and I really tried hard, but my prayer was, I don't want to do this if it means that I don't really continue to do the kinds of work I thought I was doing in politics. That is, if I'm in this, it has to be because I want people to be liberated, not because I want to add anything like religion on top of their lives.
Yeah. Well, and here you are now. You are the religion guy.
Yes.
You were the economics guy, the political science guy, the religion guy. You're all these things, and also an LGBTQ plus activist. I mean, and that's a big part of our ministries. I mean, we are our wing of the church is an affirming and celebrating outreach to LGBTQ plus people and our families and allies. And so this is Pride Month.
Yes.
And so maybe just say a word, like, what's your message to not only queer people of faith, but queer people have had their faith robbed from them, or beaten out of them, or shamed out of them, or whatever. There are people who just for their own peace of mind and integrity and safety felt like they had to give up religion. Absolutely. So not only the religious, but the non-religious too. But we're all human, and we're all we depend on one another in one way or another. What's your message to queer folks during this Pride Month?
I'm glad you asked that. This Pride Month, I when we do our worship planning for Pride Month, we always have a Pride Month, lectionary series that we create, and this year I really was I didn't want to have a through line, but whether you call it the Holy Spirit or something happened, there is a through line. But what I think it's consistent with what I say. Normally, what I try to get people to really understand, and if we were not in COVID, this is also the time where we really do get a lot of people who don't have a church family or not interested in church who give us a look during Pride. Mm-hmm. And so the message is always a broader, but the message I'm giving in which it's consistent is that regardless of what religions have said about us and tried to do to us, the worthiness, the belovedness, the fundamental goodness of LGBTQ plus people is a spiritual, biblical, and theological given. It's given.
Yeah.
You don't have to argue over it. You don't have to debate it. If something is a given, it is, whether someone thinks it is or don't want it to be, it is because it is. And there is not one thing any preacher or anybody can do about. They can preach till they're blue in the face. As soon as while you're sitting there, and when you leave, your belovedness, your worthiness, and your fundamental goodness is a given because it has been given to you by God. I preach on Sunday that we are the fingerprints of God. If you just look at us, then you are seeing the fingerprints. You're seeing that God is in the mix. And so I want people to understand that whether it's God or higher power or God of your understanding or spirit, whatever it is, your worthiness, your belovedness, your fundamental goodness means that whomever you draw on, wherever you look for inspiration, that God, being, inspiration, is mindful of and cares for you always. Always. So when you, and I tell especially people who are not a part of our community, when you leave here or when you stop listening, I want you to have it echo in your mind. If nobody else loves me in this world, God does. And if I can't have a conception of God, if somehow that doesn't make sense, my experience has distanced me from this idea of God, if I'm atheist or if I'm agnostic, then if that's what, then remember, Pastor Dewayne loves you.
Nice. Yes.
So now you have knowledge that you are loved at least by one person.
It happens every Pride Month. This is part of it, just comes out of me. Whenever we're talking about God in Pride Month, and many other times too.
Yeah.
Our friend Pastor Dan Koshel, he used to ask people when we would do interviews for clergy interviews. He would always ask people, what is one scripture that you stand on? Like, no matter what's going on, what is the scripture that you stand on? And I've got a handful, of course, but one of them is Ezekiel 1:28, where the prophet says, I had a vision of God, and the glory of God was like the bow that appears in the sky after it rains. And so this rainbow God,
yes.
Obviously that just brings me joy whenever I'm speaking to the rainbow community about God, is that of course rainbow people, we've got a rainbow God. And so
right.
I love that. Well, of course, I've got one more question for you. Finally, a softball, because everyone gets the same one. They know what it's going to be. So although it's just the most deepest question ever, so maybe it's not a softball, but it is the one that we always end on. But before I ask that, people have undoubtedly been taking notes. They've been Googling your church. I need to hear more from Pastor Dewayne. And you actually, from that very seat in that very room on Wednesdays, you just share thoughts and wisdom. Sometimes bounce off with another person, but you have this kind of connection with people every Wednesday from that very seat in that very room at 4
Eastern, 3
Eastern, 3 Central. Yes. Okay, so tell us how we can tune in and listen to you every Wednesday.
Just go to the All God's Children Facebook page. You can get it there. You can go to our website too, but the Facebook page, because that's where all of our everything goes. That's where we start talking, where we see things. That's where you actually get to see what's going on in the life of the church. We have posts about the food pantry we're doing. We have posts about some quotes that we are doing, but on 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays, we have Solace for the Soul. And what we say is that this is our attempt to just sort of decrease any, that we want to make sure that our physical distance doesn't become spiritual communal distance. And we just start off by breathing. we just sort of take that wind of God and breathe, and then we pray. And normally I just do a little bit of just a reflection on things like distance, about grief, about loss, just to name, especially during the COVID situation, just to name some of the things that we're encountering. Over the last 2 weeks, I've been naming some of the issues around what we've been seeing. Certainly what started off in the Twin Cities with George Floyd, but it was a way of naming things in a spiritual context and bounded by prayer, but not just prayer. I read poems and blessings. You'll hear things from Langston Hughes or Audre Lorde, because the wisdom of our artists really do, I think, carry much of the weight of some of that grief now. I just wish we could play music, though. It's just hard to do it.
We'll get there. So my last question for you, what happens when we die?
Oh, that's right. Here's the thing. I don't know. And the great gift that I received is being able to say that and feel comfort in saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I want to just give some clarity why I say that, because I really do believe, especially when I read the Gospels, and I'll make the connection. What really made me believe that is when in the Gospel of John, when Jesus said, "I came that you might have life and have it abundantly." And Jesus wasn't talking about something that happens when you die.
Mm-hmm.
That no commentary, no scholar, conservative or liberal, believes that Jesus was talking about what happens to you. And so my question is, the life that we were born into, the systems into which we're born, the empires into which we're born, make it so very difficult. I think it will be it will take away from the abundant life that is your gift for us to be preoccupied with what happens after it. My ministry is about doing everything I can for us to enjoy that life. And so I really, that's a question I don't even think much about.
Right, yeah. Well, Jesus prayed, "Your kingdom come," not "let us get to your kingdom."
Exactly.
Get
So,
here.
right, and Darrell, I grew up thinking about that. That's all my political tradition talked about. But I really, it was a great gift to me, because now my friendships, my relationships, those opportunities when I meet wonderful people, the people I love meeting people, those are the great graces of an abundant life that just keep on giving. I cannot tell you how many times just even talking with you, my friend, when we just make a point of doing a FaceTime, that afterwards, this goes with other friends, my friends all over the United States. We get off the phone and my life just has this burst of energy, because that has become one of the great graces of an abundant life that I hold dear to.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Davis, you are one of the smartest people I've ever known. And so it's intimidating to try to go head to head with you, even socially, much less with people watching.
God bless you.
But I knew that people would love hearing you, and I know people at Sunshine Cathedral were actually looking forward to you being on tonight. So thanks so much for making the time for us and sharing with us. And so we're wishing you and all God's children all the best, and just so grateful for your work in ministry. And I'm grateful for your friendship. So thanks for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you. And I can't wait to get back to Sunshine Theory. If we were not in a COVID world, I would have been there worshiping with you at least once or twice by now. And so we are missing.
We're missing our annual trip to the Midwest. It used to be a quarterly trip to DC, and then it became an annual trip to the Midwest because you moved away from,
I know.
Minneapolis is gain. No, we had COVID. So this is weird. Although I've seen you, we're doing this a lot, so thank God. But yeah, I miss sitting around that table, talking with you, eating, drinking coffee and whatnot. But
yeah, well, I'm praying for Fort Lauderdale. I'm so thankful for you. You all bless me all the time. So give my love to all of the people at Sunshine Cathedral.
Absolutely.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.